Welcome. Thanks for joining us. As I look around, I see some familiar faces and some new faces. Hopefully, I'll have an opportunity to meet many more of you throughout the day. My name is Shadia Ahmadi. I am the Director of Alumni Relations and Annual Giving at the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation here at Columbia University. It's an honor and privilege to have a chance to share some of the work that we've done recently with all of you. GSAP's Office of Alumni Relations was established about 8 years ago, right around the time the CAA was being established. And since then, we've had exponential growth in activity and leadership. And about 3.5 years ago, the GSAP Alumni Association Board was established, and Sharon has been the outstanding super leader of the group since then. And so as her term was coming to an end this past June, we all got together and realized, okay, we have a problem. You know, what's next? And who can we bring in to really follow in Sharon's footsteps, and what is the future of the GSAP board going to look like? And this led to a much larger conversation that Jill and Sharon will share with you.
I'm happy to be here. It's been such a wonderful process to work with Shadia and Sharon through this, as well as some other groups on campus that I've had the pleasure to talk about succession planning and what the board needs are. I think one of the reasons why you come to this is because you find a challenge or you're wondering what's going on. But here's the thing, you're all great leaders. You're all giving up your time this weekend to become better leaders or learn how to use skills differently. And you're committed, but we don't want to exhaust you. Or we want you to serve in one place, like Sharon. What Sharon is doing is serving in multiple places at once. Very generous, maybe not the example for everyone. So we want to talk a little bit through how we looked at GSAP. I'm going to throw in more of a CAA umbrella every now and then, and there are some other schools that I've had the pleasure of doing this with. So the bylaws are what really helps us be flexible or not flexible. A board should really be reflecting the bylaws, but I think what happens a lot, and we've seen it recently, is we're not reviewing them, and they're no longer reflecting the current state of what that school needs or what that group needs. So for GSAP, what we did was we took a step back and thought about this, and we looked at these bylaws. These bylaws were not flexible. No. These bylaws were not reflecting the current state of the school, the current state of the leaders, and what they really needed to keep growing. And that's a big part of this. Like, what is sustainable for a school or a group? A farm system is when you have your star, say 5 players on a basketball team, but what if one of you, God forbid, gets injured or takes another position? So who are we going to call on to fill in those 5 spots? So you need to have a bench, there's the sports term, deep enough to bring on other people. And that's something we should be doing in the clubs. That's something we should be doing for every council, whether it's called an alumni association or leadership board or whatever the title is. So the committees too, and we're going to talk more about that. So a bylaw would help reflect a good farm system or what a farm system should look like. As well, you really want to make sure that all of you believe in these bylaws. No one likes to read a rule of a committee or something, a mission that's supposed to be steering you that doesn't make sense or doesn't feel like the reason you went to that school or why you're part of Columbia. Make sure it's very reflective of the work that you and your committee or group plan to do. We're participating in something very similar. We have fantastic leaders at General Studies. They're amazing. Their group is called the Recent Alumni Leadership Committee. Recent alumni, meaning that they've been out of their program at General Studies within less than 10 years. They're fantastic, but guess what? They're getting close to 7, 8, 9, 10 years out. What are we going to do with these great leaders? We need to give them something else to do. We don't want to lose them. We want to keep them engaged.
Right, that's true. I mean, I think once we had identified the problem, it was a lot easier to solve it, right? I mean, that's always the first step, knowing what your issue was. And part of it was the bylaws, part of it was that we were a young organization, but we really wanted to keep the momentum going. We had finally gotten up and running, and we didn't want to lose anything. We wanted to just, keep it moving along. So really, but because we were young, and because a young staff, not really knowing exactly how to do this, we look to our partner, the CAA. So it's we can do the Big Ten thing, which was great. It would be great if we all had time to reinvent the wheel every time, but we don't, right? So we needed a quick solution. So we all approached the CAA. We approached Jill and one of her colleagues, Ken, and we said, okay, here we are. How do we do this? And then we also talked about, the governance process, right? What was documented, what was missing. As Jill said, our bylaws were kind of boilerplate, and we in GSAP, we're not lawyers, most of us. And it seems like a lot of gobbledygook, but what we realized was that the bylaws really are important because they do set the tone for the organization, and they help it make it possible for you to keep moving along, and it really defines the character of the organization.
Absolutely. And I think another thing that came out that would be important for all of you to keep in mind, and a discussion that all of us have had on an ongoing basis is, once you really know the DNA of your constituency, look at everyone else and see how you can tailor that for your own group. So we did reach out to multiple schools. We had conversations with them. My colleagues at the same, my peers that are the alumni directors, we had conversations. So what does your succession plan look like? What does the process of creating a slate look like for your school? And we sat down collectively and thought, okay, so this may work, this may not work. We went over it at that point with the governance committee and just started weeding through the options and narrowing it down to what looks like the best and most feasible thing to make this process as easy and as smooth as possible for our group. So it is, again, a testament to having an opportunity to work with everyone across the board. And I think another thing to clarify about Jill's role is that Jill is actually, to the brilliant setup of the CAA, she is the liaison to all the schools. So basically when we have to address something like this, she can, just like she did with us, and as she's mentioning the general studies program, she is the person that liaises in how we address and takes it back to the think tank of the CAA and brings us all back home to, address the issue and tailor it.
Right.
So again, finding what that tailored recipe is, again.
Yeah, I think no group, no board should feel alone in any of this. We've all heard about Nation Builder and the Toolbox and all the things that are coming out for people that have traveled and are distant from New York. But the point is the infrastructure is set up so that there are almost like consultants or best practices already set for you. So when we figure out what's the problem, what do we need, let's all come together and do it together. Let's make sure your alumni are on board and figure out the best way. It's not a template. It cannot be a template. The beauty of Columbia is every single one of your schools look incredibly different. They have very different needs. Your alumni have different interests. But that doesn't mean that we haven't seen it before or someone in our organization doesn't have history about why it looks that way and why we should move it in a certain direction. I want to, if we're okay, can we circle back a little bit to the succession planning? Something that is very important about the succession planning, and I joke lightly about having that farm system, but I really mean it. It's not a joke. You need a farm system, and you need a way to think about your leaders. So some boards are structured with co-advisors, co-presidents, or maybe for an executive committee. As you're in that role, you need to start thinking about what does it look like not to be on the board? How are you going to engage student leaders? How are you going to engage alumni coming out of your programs to want to be part of this? They're not ready to be on your board yet, but there needs to be some interim moments. So you're learning about them, they're learning about you. There's this on-the-job training going on so that there is this bench. And something we talk about a lot, and both of you mentioned it, are the committees. So a lot of the boards or a lot of the clubs all have their own committee structures. And something that people, I've noticed, forget to look at when you're going through a process like this are the committees. Like there are tons of, let's say, communication committees. Why? Maybe you have an answer, and if question every committee, question everyone's role, because the committees really need to reflect what we need as a board, what we need to move forward, and how the bylaws are going to help and support each other. So I think a good example of this is another school that I was working with had a communications committee. The Office of Alumni and Development, we do the communicating for them. So we couldn't understand why they had a communications committee. As well, the school has a phenomenal communications group, and we work with them. So what we found was we had alumni, 4 wonderful leaders who were on a committee, part of a board, that didn't have jobs. That's a problem. We need our leaders to have jobs. They need to know what the direction is, and they need to know what they're doing all the time. So a committee that I know we've talked about, that I think you chair that also, for GSAP is the nominating committee. A nominating committee is essential for all of these organizations because those are the people who are making sure we're figuring out who's next in line. And when I talk about that gap between you're on a board, you're not on a board, but you want to volunteer, your committees are great places to put volunteers. They're not the people responsible to being at Sharon's board meetings. They're not necessarily the people that are responsible for checking in with administrators or reporting to the dean, but they are the people that are helping you, at an event. They are the people that are getting the word out. Maybe they're just out of their program. Yeah. They're the people that are getting back and getting the students involved at a very early age, early state of the student's life. So your committee structure and how you do that is just as important as the board and the bylaws and how this all plays in.
Yeah. And then I also think one of the things we've talked about a lot at the CAA with the strategic plan is the life cycle of the volunteer, right? At different points in people's lives, they can volunteer more or less. So there may be times when they're just starting out and have more time or less time, and there's different levels of time commitment. So really finding a way to keep people involved and engaged.
And so they're not burnt out, and they feel like they want to be a part of everything. And to all these points, we actually did revise a few bylaws that had to do with our committee structure to make sure we're allowing more flexibility. One of the things that we were missing in our bylaws that wasn't clear was who can be a committee member, which was a key issue. Many of our outstanding volunteers had reached out to alums who had wanted to be engaged, and they put together their own committees. But was it in writing? Did we actually say that it's a part of their roles as committee chairs to establish committees with volunteers that are not board members? We were missing all of those pieces. So that really did, again, contribute to some of, the gaps.
It was great. We had Jill actually show up at our board meeting. We had the buy-in of the board, and it was very helpful for us. Clearly Jill can't be around the globe doing this, but it was really important for us because I think it set up the framework that this is something that's done. This is really a best practice, and it helped just make it clear to our whole board where the future was and what we needed to do to get there.
As well, we've spent time with a talent manager, someone also at Office of Alumni and Development, a great guy who helps really talk leaders through this process. Because right now you're all sitting here and you're thinking about, this is what we need to do. Well, let's hope so. Or are you guys all sitting here? Okay, good. Because that's why you're here for the weekend. How are we going to improve our roles or others' roles? So you're sitting here thinking about how you can do it in a certain way.
And I know something that I'm going to steal one of Sharon's many lines.
Right in front of you.
It's just, what do we want to look like when we grow up? And many of you may have boards that are older than 3.5, 4 years, right? So we're just stepping into our adolescence, per se. And with that, again, it was the idea of growing pains. Not only is our activity growing, and as far as our alumni presence throughout the country and what we're doing, we've expanded from, you know, really having leaders and events in 3 to 11 cities in the past couple of years. We have over 1,300 alums that come to our events. So again, this all, we had to balance it out, and the big picture, what are our leaders aspiring to be as we move forward? And so now we are going through the similar process, and Sharon can talk a little bit about this whole idea of building the vision.
Right, sure. So I think, Jill alluded to it earlier, but it was one of the panels, and maybe some of you sat in on Jay's panel earlier this morning on goal setting. Yes, I see a few nods. Well, I sat in that one last year, and I said, he is amazing, he's wonderful, and this is what we need to do. This is what we need to be doing for our board, because we really realized the same thing. We all have a lot of expertise, and people bring a lot of different skills to the table, but this was an area where we said, you know what, it would be great to have someone from the outside come in who has a process, and again, it's that best practice thing, but there's a process, it's defined, and he can help us work through setting goals, setting the vision for our organization. So actually yesterday afternoon, we started our first session with him. Yay, it was very exciting. We had a good representation of our board members, including a few new board members who had come on through the nomination process, as well as recent alums. And it's really exciting to work through that. So we're continuing this afternoon. We'll do some more of that today, and hopefully we'll have a really clear vision, because things do evolve, right? We are growing, and we have this view of it'll help us better define where we want to be in the future, the type of people we want to have on our board, right? The type of expansion we want to have around the globe, and how to get people involved and really engaged.
And from our end, the beauty of doing an exercise like this is that we have a clear idea of what our leaders want from us. And it'll give us a clear vision, per se, as we're putting it together, of how to better serve each and every one of our alums. There were things that were brought up yesterday that were eye-opening for our team, because we realized, wow, we're doing a lot of this, but we're just not communicating it properly. So you never know, once you're going through the process, and it's kind of like this soul-searching with your volunteers, you're like, wow, so okay, we need to improve on this part, we need to improve on this part. Another very interesting piece that came out of all of it was there was a theme that came up in many of our volunteers' concerns, and Jay had suggested bringing in a student and recent alum that's getting a dual degree into the session, and she spoke up and she said, we actually are doing all of this. We're already doing this. Why is everyone asking about this? So it's a moment of reflection before you're entering your new phase with a new leader or new ideas, per se.
To me, the light at the end of the tunnel is everyone that wants to be a volunteer has a place to be a volunteer through Columbia. So whether it's one time a year, you're doing some type of an interviewing of prospective students, or if it's one time a month, you're coming on campus to mentor a student or mentor another alumni, or maybe it's, Leaders Weekends. So there's always a place for someone who wants to give back to Columbia in this way is the best. Now, when we talk about individual schools, and I know we reflected on general studies, and at this point I'm just pointing at them in the audience. But what I would like to see for general studies is that everyone that is a current leader that wants to continue on, that there will be a place for them. But there's also a great acceptance, and that already exists, for the new energy and for new general studies alumni to join, as well as students will see this organization as something they aspire to do as they're finishing their degree, and they're looking to see how they can then give back to general studies.
It's exciting, you know. I think when I started, you know, as the president of GSAP, we were very new and it was very exciting. And we got through this process. There was also so much work. And it was true. I was really tired. I mean, there was a lot of details. There was a lot of just getting things going, you know, keeping our board engaged, keeping our volunteers engaged, and a lot of coordination that happens all behind the scenes to really make it work. And I said, oh goodness, you know, we've been so focused on how we organize that we really didn't think about the succession planning.
Yeah.
We knew it was an issue and we kind of flagged it, but it was like we were just trying to, you know, get things going and build that momentum, so we didn't think about it. And they said, oh, please, please. And so yes, there is light at the end of the tunnel. They, you know, they kindly asked, and we voted on it. We extended my term 1 year. That was it. No longer than that. So we know there's a plan in the works.
To add, this was an interesting point, that when we did extend Sharon's term, please keep in mind we did not change bylaws. I think this was a key piece that Ken and Jill really explained, and when they did our consults with the board, they wanted everyone to understand that this doesn't mean this is going to be a part of your bylaws, and hopefully it won't be a trend in the future, because hopefully we'll be thinking about succession planning way in advance, right? So I think that's another key piece for everyone to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think what's really good is that having gone through this process, and having the whole board go through this process too, is that we understand that we do need this farm system. And we're now on the lookout for all those, you know, leaders who are going to be coming up, coming through the ranks, serving as the next president for their 2-year term, and moving on, and training the next person. So we really know we'll have that line of sight to who's next in line, and hopefully even who's coming up behind them as well, which I think would be wonderful for the organization.
Being involved in your school, being involved on the CAA level, being involved in different committees through CAA, when I think about leaders, this is an ongoing joke where I work. When you have a good leader and you know they're coming to the end of their term, it's what can we do with them next? Right? So that's your question. So thinking about that president, if it's a regional situation, right? If they're maybe not in New York, you know, connecting with my colleagues who work on the clubs in different places of the country or the world, and how they can be a leader and contribute in that aspect, which is very important to Columbia. Also thinking about what do we have in the Columbia Alumni Association and all the committees, and where is it appropriate to engage someone on that level as well. So I think there are always going to be roles for people to volunteer and raise their hand. It's just making sure the right people are connected. You know, one thing we didn't talk about, and I had notes to talk about, was, and Sade made me think of it, when you do have an international population, or we do have leaders that are moving, which makes it hard for them to participate in what the norm has been for your group, there are other places to connect them. So thank you. This brings it back to that conversation. Where do they live? What's going on with Columbia there? And what's going on with the CAA? That could keep them fresh.
So I think there's a variety of ways. The CAA it also has a nomination process, right, itself. And I think there's a variety of different types of leaders that are on the CAA board, and some of them are school-based, and some of them are regional-based, and there's a whole set of nuances and distinctions that I can't claim to know all about. But certainly, there are a number of committees, and the CAA has been very open and, you know, encouraging of people to get involved in the university.
I think a lot of people forget to use them and pay attention to them when voting on things, as simple as opening a meeting, closing a meeting, things like that. So I'm going to try to answer this. It's many parts, right? And then please jump in. So I think the first thing is the folks that are leading, and if there's an administrator involved in your group, making sure everyone understands what the bylaws mean. Sharon joked earlier that she's not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. They can look tricky for someone who's not trained to understand them. So making sure whatever your bylaws are, that you understand what every one of the lines mean and how you would apply it to a meeting setting, a group, an event, and nominating. So that's one thing I would recommend that happens. And then it's practicing them. It's really practicing them. For instance, some of the board meetings I get to attend, they're very regimented with their bylaws. Meetings are opened with, can we start? Raise your hand, I need a second. Can we adjourn? And they put their bylaws into practice. It also has a lot to do, I think, with the personalities of the folks running those meetings and the board. But that's something that you need to decide. But if you really want to see them endure and carry on, I would recommend making sure that they're understood and that they're practiced. And then, of course, there's templates and ideas of ways for any of the leaders here to look at and just to use to assess and benchmark what you're using now, so we can get them to you. We at the university are spending a lot of time and attention on data. And we want it, and we love it. And we are continuing to put systems in place that will help your role and other roles like that have less of the burden and or at least support it differently.
Those of us who are in the roles of alumni directors that travel the country, and our plan over the past year and a half has been to really look at the cities that have the top 10 largest pockets of alumni from GSAP, and really spend some time and get to know our population and see what their interests are. And as I've traveled to the top 10 cities, I've had the honor of collaborating with the presidents of the Columbia clubs of each region, as each and every one of you bring insight to the table that none of us would have per se, because you're on the ground and you're working with the volunteers every day. And it's amazing how every city we've landed in has had a completely different type of response, and how I'm currently working with the different regional leaders is very different. I'll use this. I know there are 3 leaders in the room that I've worked with specifically. The Boston Club, for example, when we were hosting an event in Boston, our attendance just didn't look like it was where we wanted it to be. And within 45 minutes, the Boston Club sent an e-blast out to all Columbia University alumni in the area, because we had spots. We had already planned an event, and we wanted to open it to everyone so they can enjoy it. And we had, I think, 11 GSAP attendees and 14 Columbia University non-GSAP attendees that came. And it was a wonderful opportunity for everyone to mix and mingle in the room. And we're very appreciative. In Atlanta, we are working on collaborating with the Atlanta group. And there are GSAP alumni that are involved with the Atlanta club that we don't have a relationship with. So we've reached out to the regional director saying, how can we all work together? And our upcoming event that's going to be in November is actually a collaboration.
Although it may be school specific, as the president of that region and that club, she wants to still facilitate, because it may help her then build her feeder system. It may help her then build that bench.
Exactly.
So GSAP, maybe there's alums in GSAP, whatever Roxanne's doing in Atlanta, they haven't been stimulated by it. They haven't gone to the club yet. They haven't been interested in what the venue or activities have been. However, now Sade and Sharon go down and they're doing something very specific to the discipline. So there's still a connection, because Roxanne gets to meet more alumni, even though it's a closed school event. And hopefully there'll be some leaders that she can enticed to join her club. I think it's really important your next meeting to revisit those bylaws and, you know, see where folks are as far as volunteering. That's a great way to remind everyone of their commitment. And it's also great to think about this process and take a step back and maybe assess and make sure that they are the right bylaws for this group. Maybe their loyalty will be more to the group than that last person if they see they have their voice will be heard differently. When leadership changes, everyone gets a little worried about what's going to leave, what's going to, you know, go out, what's going to stay in. And I think you just need to really establish that you're going to try to keep it business as usual. And you need their institutional knowledge of that club. Just became the president, however, there's no more farm system. So you were that recent young alum that went to all of the events and they've been grooming you for this. Ooh, you fell for it. So what I would say, a few things, is you need to really, I think Michaela was in the room, or Jesse Myget. Great. We need for you to lean on us at the university, and what you're going to have to learn to do really quick is some alumni relations work in your region. And I'm not doing this on purpose, but to me, it goes right back to data. Who is in those areas? Who could you possibly invite for a small brainstorming session that the club, you know, the university can maybe help you fund just for the moment, just to invite everyone to see who's interested that you can start thinking about for the next phase. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
But you know what? This is, I think, I got excited when you said that because I know
Sade wants it. Sorry.
I mean, what could be more exciting than building something on your own? Something
You and DC are completely opposite.
Something that you've already invested 4 years of time in. I'm guessing that you would have an idea of what you think the future should look like. And you have an incredible, to Jill's point, you have an incredible group of professionals that are doing this every day, all day, every day. I can assure you, all of us wake up in the middle of the night and check our phones as well. So take advantage of this opportunity. You're in a really good place, really, really good place. You should be so excited. And you know what? And this is actually a moment of, you know, sorry, I really love what I do, so I guess it shows. So just take a moment and think back at, I think this is the key piece. Think back at the farm system that brought you in. What worked, what didn't work.
It's really good advice. It's going to be okay.
That's going to be your winning ticket right now because you're actually a product of that process that we're all testing the waters with. So just some inner reflection of, you know, when you're building your system, what is it going to look like? Hopefully that's helpful. Thank you to everyone.
This has been so much fun.